I wasn't looking for Tartaria when I found the dark day of 1780, May 19th to be exact, when the sky went black across New England and parts of eastern Canada. Not dark, not cloudy, black. Midday turned to midnight. People lit candles at noon. Livestock returned to their barns thinking night had fallen. The darkness was so complete, so absolute, that legislators in Connecticut adjourned because they literally could not see each other across the room. The official explanation is simple. Forest fires, smoke from distant burning woods carried by unusual atmospheric conditions. Neat, contained, and for most people that's where the story ends. But the deeper I went into contemporary accounts, the more that explanation began to crack, because the event reads less like weather and more like a system failure. Witnesses describe the darkness arriving like a curtain being drawn. Timothy Dwight, later president of Yale, wrote that the darkness was as uncommon in its appearance as in its depth. Not smoke settling, not clouds gathering, a sudden advancing wall of blackness. And at the edges, where the last remaining light fought back, multiple accounts describe a copper or brass-colored hue, like the air itself had been changed. That night, the moon rose blood-red behind the haze. Have you ever wondered why an era we're told was simple produced testimonies that sound like technical observation? People weren't afraid. They were describing a phenomenon with repeatable features, abrupt onset, unnatural depth, colored margins, a red moon, the air behaving like a filter. Samuel Williams, a Harvard professor who documented the event, estimated the affected area at more than 150,000 square miles. That isn't a campfire story. That's a regional event. So why do we accept a local, harmless explanation so quickly? Because 1780 doesn't sit alone. It sits at the center of a constellation of other impossibilities, sky anomalies clustered in the late 18th century, and an equally strange shift on paper, the disappearance of Tartaria from maps. Let me be clear about what we're told happened. Tartary, or Tartaria, was just a vague term Europeans used for vast territories across Central and Northern Asia. Then cartography improved, borders refined, names updated. The term faded naturally, case closed. Except that's not how map-making worked in the 1700s. Mapmakers were obsessive. They cited sources. They explained corrections. They argued in footnotes. They didn't erase a centuries-old label across multiple publishing houses, multiple languages, multiple empires, without leaving a trail of transitional explanation. And here, the official narrative begins to crumble, because the normal evolution story fails the simplest test. Transitions leave marks. This one looks like cleaning. Now, I'm not asking you to worship a word on an old map. I'm asking you to notice timing. 1776, a new nation declares independence, new myths, new origin stories, new beginnings. 1780, the sky goes black in the middle of the day. Then, in the decades after, the term Tartary fades in a way that feels coordinated rather than organic. Not all at once, not with a dramatic announcement, but systematically, like a stain being scrubbed from multiple documents until the page looks normal again. And while scholars debate what the label meant, the ground beneath our feet delivers the second anomaly. Architecture that looks too standardized, too sophisticated, and too widespread to belong to the story we're given. What follows 1780 roughly 1780 to 1850, is what I've come to call the inheritance period. It's the window where massive, technologically sophisticated buildings appear across the world with suspiciously similar features. We're told it's a neoclassical revival, a return to Greek and Roman ideals that spreads from Europe to the Americas, to Russia, to colonial outposts, to far-flung capitals, all within a few decades. Progress, ambition, human ingenuity. That's the slogan, but slogans don't move stone. So I started asking questions that feel rude only because we've been trained not to ask them. How did a young San Francisco build world-class Beaux Arts palaces and monumental civic facades? How did Melbourne, still a colonial outpost, raise exhibition halls that rival European cathedrals? How did Chicago erect a white-plastered exhibition city in a blink, then conveniently let much of it burn or be dismantled, leaving behind photographs of grandeur and a narrative of triumph? The official answer is always a story about effort. The missing piece is the mechanism. Where are the full supply chain records for millions of tons of stone? Where are the labor rosters proportional to the workload? Where are the staged construction photo sequences for the most complex elements, foundations, vaults, domes, iron skeletons, especially in an era when photography was already hungry for spectacle? We have endless images of completed buildings. We have images of ruins, fires, rebuilds, and restorations. We have dedication plaques and ceremonial speeches. What we often don't have is the hard, boring, engineering-heavy evidence that real construction leaves behind. That absence matters. In real engineering, the hardest part leaves the most paperwork. In real empires, the biggest projects leave receipts. When the receipts are missing, you're not looking at nothing. You're looking at institutional silence. And once you see that silence, you start noticing something else. The buildings themselves speak a common language. Dome geometry repeats with the same proportional discipline across continents. Ornament repeats in patterns that look less like random decoration and more like standardized motifs, almost like circuits in stone and iron. Towers rise where you'd expect nodes. Fountains cluster where you'd expect junctions. Streets align with a precision that suggests surveying done by a system that already knew what it was building. This is where I introduce the term that changes everything for me: antique logistics. Not romantic old roads, but an underlying network, routes, depots, standards that allows heavy material to move and large projects to happen without the chaos the official story implies. A civilization doesn't produce global architectural standardization without global logistical standardization. And if the logistics existed, then the question becomes, who laid the network before the network was invented? Now add the third anomaly: energy. We're taught to see cathedrals and domes as art, symbols of faith and power. But symbols don't require such obsessive functional features. High spires with conductive caps, repeating metalwork, resonant chambers, waterworks integrated into civic cores. If you've ever studied how systems hide in plain sight, you know the first step is relabeling function as decoration. So I ask the forbidden how. Not just how were they built, but what were they for? And this is where the concept of atmospheric electricity enters the room. The atmosphere is not empty. It is an electrical medium with gradients and potential differences. Modern life depends on invisible fields. We just accept them because they're packaged as normal.
If an older civilization understood how to harvest and route atmospheric electricity through geometry, height, water, and conductive pathways, then the architecture stops being merely pretty. It becomes hardware. That's the esoteric purpose, not a cult fantasy, but concealed function. Cathedrals as stations, domes as collectors or resonators, fountains as regulating nodes in a broader network, ornament as a schematic language, a way of encoding and repeating functional design. And the more I study old photographs, the more I see features that were later shortened, capped, removed, or made safe. It looks less like random renovation and more like systematic conversion. This is why the dark day matters. If the atmosphere itself became loaded, particulate, tinted, electrically abnormal, then any system dependent on atmospheric conditions would fail. A sudden curtain of darkness is not just dim sunlight, it is a change in the operating medium.
In other words, the dark day reads like a visible glitch in the environment that a global system might rely on. Now comes the uncomfortable synthesis. What if 1780 wasn't a regional smoke incident, but the last visible signature of a larger collapse? A civilization-ending event, war, internal fracture, catastrophe, large enough to throw debris into the sky, disrupt climate, and create years of abnormal atmospheric behavior. A nuclear winter without nuclear weapons, dust, haze, filtered light, failing harvests, mass displacement. An event that would also explain why a vast name on maps begins to vanish, and why a massive built environment suddenly appears to be claimed rather than explained. Because after collapse comes inheritance. If cities, infrastructure, and monumental buildings already existed, empty or partially emptied, then emerging powers would face a problem: ownership. Empty cities don't belong to anyone and everyone, so you create foundation myths, you install plaques, you write histories, you claim that your new nation, your new empire, your new administration built what it actually found. You don't need to forge every detail, you only need to sever continuity. Once continuity is severed, the old builders become ghosts and the new owners become founders. This is where the global coordination question stops being absurd and becomes practical. Why would rival empires agree to bury a prior civilization? Because rivalry comes after consolidation. First, you divide assets. Britain, Russia, the United States, the Qing sphere, enemies in theory, heirs in practice. They don't need a secret meeting, they only need aligned incentives. The incentive is legitimacy. The tool is narrative. The shield is denial of the obvious. And so Tartaria becomes just a geographic term. The architectural inheritance becomes a triumph of progress. The missing construction record becomes lost documents. The clustered sky anomalies become unrelated natural disasters. The dark day becomes smoke. Everything gets an explanation that is technically possible in isolation, but statistically absurd in combination. This is the trick of partial truth. A forest fire can darken a sky, a volcano can produce fog, a cold year can happen, a grand building can be built. But when all of these stack in the same tight window, while maps are being cleaned and monumental infrastructure is being claimed, you're not just looking at nature, you're looking at a historical operation. I can't prove a single smoking gun. That's the point.
A successful erasure doesn't leave a signed confession, it leaves smooth surfaces and confident textbooks. It leaves professional certainty where curiosity should be. It leaves hostility toward questions. It leaves institutional silence so loud you can hear it in the gaps. So I return to the beginning, May 19th, 1780, and I replay it with fresh eyes. The sky goes black. People light candles at noon. Animals behave as if reality has shifted. The darkness arrives like a drawn curtain. Its edges glow copper. The moon turns blood red. The affected area is vast. Then the story is quickly domesticated. Smoke. No further investigation needed. Move on. But what if the dark day was not smoke hiding a fire, but smoke hiding and ending? What if it was the atmosphere's last visible testimony, an artifact you could see with your own eyes, that something immense was burning, breaking, or being dismantled beyond the horizon of official memory? And what if when the haze cleared, the world didn't begin, it changed hands? That's the question that keeps me digging, because once you start looking at cities as inherited machines instead of built-from-scratch miracles, you see anomalies everywhere. You see domes that don't match the timeline. You see stonework that implies tooling the narrative doesn't grant. You see underground corridors too tall to be cellars. You see fountains placed like nodes. You see spires altered like amputations. You see the same architectural DNA in places that should not share it.
Now, if you're new to this, you might be thinking, Tartaria was always a vague label. Of course it disappears. But vagueness is not the same as insignificance. Tartary sat on maps for centuries like a placeholder for an enormous reality, large enough to deserve ink, consistent enough to deserve repetition, and the way it fades is what bothers me. Not a documented correction, not a declared discovery, but a slow, coordinated replacement. Different publishers, different countries, different languages, yet the same outcome. That kind of synchronized forgetting doesn't happen by accident. In the 18th century, cartography was a competitive business. Map makers argued with each other. They copied, yes, but they also annotated, defended, and explained. When a label that old disappears without a loud debate, the absence becomes a document of its own. That absence is a fingerprint. So I built a simple timeline, not as proof, but as a lens. 1776, a new nation declares independence. A new narrative demands a clean beginning. 1780, the dark day, the sky turns off. 1783, Europe is covered in dry fog. People report a sun like a dim coin, headaches, animals disturbed. The air behaves like it's been altered. 1783 to 84, severe cold, crop failures, unseasonable weather, a world that feels unstable. 1816, the year without a summer, global shock, hunger, migration, the climate acting like it's recovering from something. Official history breaks this into separate boxes, fires here, volcano there, weather everywhere, coincidence stacked on coincidence. But when I see a tight cluster of atmospheric anomalies paired with a tight cluster of cartographic and architectural shifts, I stop believing in coincidence. I start looking for a single event large enough to throw multiple shadows. Because while scholars argue about aerosols, the built world keeps whispering the same question: how? Consider the construction story we're asked to swallow. In dozens of cities, monumental buildings appear in an era when transport is supposedly primitive, when skilled labor is supposedly scarce, when capital is supposedly concentrated in a few centers. Yet the monuments show up everywhere, often with the same design logic: domes, colonnades, grand stairways, perfectly spaced windows, repeating ironwork patterns, stone that looks cut with an accuracy that punishes the hand tool myth. In some cases, we're told these buildings went up astonishingly fast. In others, we're told they took decades, conveniently long enough that no one living could easily verify every phase. But speed is not the true anomaly. The anomaly is coordination. Different continents, similar output, similar standards, similar geometry, similar ornament language, similar civic placement, similar underground complexity. That's why I keep returning to antique logistics. A civilization that can produce global standardization has routes, it has depots, it has measurement systems, it has repeatable parts, it has a method for moving mass without drowning in chaos. If you remove the label Tartaria and keep the fingerprints still describe a network. Then there's the cleanup, the part everyone wants to treat as just modernization. Look at old photographs and notice how often the most strange features are the ones that vanish first. Tall spires shortened, metal caps removed, roofline ornaments simplified, fountains disconnected, courtyards redesigned, old interior layouts gutted, entire underground voids filled for sanitation. The story is always safety, always progress, always necessity, but the pattern is consistent. Whatever looks like it could interface with air, height, and water gets neutralized first. That's not proof of a hidden power grid, it's evidence of systematic conversion, turning an old interface into a new aesthetic. And that brings me back to the dark day one more time, because it is the rare moment when the sky itself becomes a photograph in your mind, an undeniable frame that cannot be dismissed as architecture style. If the atmosphere on May 19, 1780 behaved like a heavy filter, abrupt, deep, copper-edged, then the event wasn't just about light, it was about the medium. It was about the air becoming something else for a day. And if an older system depended on atmospheric conditions, humidity, charge gradients, conductive behavior, then a loaded sky could be catastrophic. You don't need fantasy, you only need physics and a network that relies on the environment. So I'm left with two possibilities. Either the 1780 event was a rare natural convergence that just happens to sit beside multiple other rare convergences, cartographic erasure, architectural uniformity, missing construction records, renovation patterns, or it is a visible symptom of a larger transition, collapse, inheritance, and historical revision. And here's what makes the second possibility feel darker: the hostility toward questions. Ask where the builders went and you get ridicule. Ask why the maps change so cleanly and you get hand-waving. Ask why construction documentation is thin where it should be thick and you get excuses. This is denial of the obvious, performed as scholarship. I'm not asking you to believe me. I'm asking you to test the mechanism. So if you're listening to this and you've ever felt that quiet wrongness, the sense that the official timeline is too smooth, too confident, too perfectly sealed, then do one practical thing. Take a walk in your own city and hunt for the too perfect object. The dome that shouldn't exist, the facade that looks imported from another continent, the ironwork that repeats like it came from a factory that isn't supposed to exist yet, the underground arch that feels older than the street above it. Photograph it. And I'll leave you with the question that always returns, like a red moon behind haze. If a civilization can be erased from maps and its cities can be inherited, relabeled, and claimed, what else have we accepted as built that was actually found?